Let's get to it.
The big news making international headlines: a nuclear-powered Russian submarine and 3 Russian ships arrived in Cuba today. What are these warships doing so close to the United States? CBS's David Martin reports tonight from the Pentagon.
Having passed just 30 miles off Florida, a 4-ship Russian flotilla pulled into Havana today, led by a warship and a submarine, both armed with guided missiles and greeted by a 21-gun salute. While the submarine is nuclear-powered, U.S. officials say there's no indication it is carrying nuclear weapons.
We, of course, take it seriously, but these exercises don't pose a threat to the United States.
It's not the first time Russian warships have pulled into Cuba, but U.S. officials say this appears intended by Vladimir Putin as a high-profile response to the Biden administration's support for Ukraine. The frigate has been used in the past to test one of Russia's newest hypersonic missiles.
We're always constantly going to monitor any foreign vessels operating near U.S. territorial waters.
2 American destroyers plus 2 ships specially equipped with sonar for tracking the submarine, along with Navy patrol planes, even sail drones, shadowed the Russian flotilla as it made its way across the Atlantic.
Whoa. What was that, a sail drone?
Drones shadowed the Russian flotilla as...
Is that a real sail drone or is that an illustration?
Along with Navy patrol planes, even sail drones shadowed the Russian flotilla as it made its way across the Atlantic into the Caribbean.
A sail drone? I didn't even know that they had sail drones. Ugh.
Russian ships are expected to remain in Havana until next week before getting underway again, perhaps for Venezuela. When they do, officials say, the U.S. Navy will start shadowing them again. A nuclear-powered submarine in Havana evokes memories of the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, but National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said today there is no evidence Russia is transferring nuclear missiles to Cuba.
It's funny because if you look at this whole proxy war, which is basically, several different nations, including the United States of America, participating in the Ukraine war by continuing to supply them with money and arms and missiles and all of this stuff. All we basically doing is playing chess, and I'm sure that there's more to it, but essentially we're fighting Russia through Ukraine. And, when you think about, and I've been following this for a long time, and obviously we knew that this was not going to be a quick war, and they basically wiped out half of Russia's military. They destroyed Ukraine in the process, but they wiped out half of Russia's military and then also destroyed half of their sea fleet. I personally, I know that we're supposed to be concerned for this because this is a military drill and all of this stuff. I personally am not concerned about this whatsoever. I think that this is just posturing. This is retaliation, or they're going through military drills in order to basically say that we don't agree with the fact that the United States of America has allowed for Ukraine or supports Ukraine now targeting actual targets within Russia itself instead of defending itself against a Russian attack. And so now basically they're saying that we don't like the fact that you're supplying weapons and you agreeing with the idea, or you're supporting a Ukraine war in which now they're not only on the defense, but they're also on an offensive as far as targeting actual military targets inside of Russia itself. Let me look at it from another lens, and then we're going to continue to go from there, because I always like to use multiple different sources in order to be able to determine whether or not I actually agree or disagree with the move.
It is a scene reminiscent out of the Cold War, and the message, well, it couldn't be any clearer.
Yeah, 3 Russian warships and a nuclear-powered submarine arrived in Cuba a few hours ago. They're taking part in planned military exercises in the Caribbean, but the real goal is essentially a projection of strength by Russia on the world stage. It's being very closely watched by the US, and it comes amid rising tensions between Washington and Moscow over, of course, the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, CNN's Patrick Ottman joins us now live from Havana. Patrick, this could be a conversation reminiscent of something we would have been discussing decades ago, and yet here we are. The U.S., we know, has been monitoring these ships very closely. Talk about the significance of it. The U.S. intelligence doesn't believe that these ships are armed with nuclear weapons. Nonetheless, just 90 miles off of the coast of Florida.
Just 90 miles off the coast of Florida and only about 50 yards from where I'm standing. Right behind me there are the 4 Russian naval ships that came into the port of Havana this morning. The ship directly behind me is a rescue ship, an icebreaker, which does not have much use in the Caribbean. And then behind that is a nuclear-powered sub, the Kazan, something Cubans say they've never seen before in this country, a nuclear-powered submarine coming in for all to witness in the port of Havana, really something quite unusual. And then behind is the Gorshkov, which is one of the most modern military ships capable of firing cruise missiles that Vladimir Putin possesses. Really highest level technology that the Russian Navy can boast. So those are for all to see. They are docked in an area a few years ago you would have seen American cruise ships, but because of U.S. sanctions, they're no longer allowed to come here. And right before we came on air, I could hear the sailors singing the Russian national anthem. So it certainly felt like a moment from the past. You know, it wasn't that long ago, of course, that the Soviet Union was supplying Cuba.
Hundreds of thousands, not just thousands, hundreds of thousands. Let's be clear.
With everything they needed here, and the economy was doing much, much better as a result. We have seen some of that come back over the last few years with the war in Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin, in exchange for Cuban support in that war, has sent more oil here, more food. There are a lot more Russian tourists here these days, and that is helping Cuba as the economy is really in some of the worst stage that it has been in decades. Literally, Russian oil, in many instances, is keeping the lights on when they are on here. Because for much of the time, there are nationwide blackouts taking place. So Cuba has increasingly voiced its support for Vladimir Putin's invasion in Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin has returned the favor. Certainly striking to see the ships here behind me, armed with nuclear weapons or not, so close to the United States.
Yeah, and just obviously, yes, very alarming. But just in terms of what Cuba has said about this, Patrick, Cuba's essentially saying, look, this is standard practice. We do this frequently with countries that are sort of friendly.
Yeah, but at the same time, the timing of it, based off of what it is that we're learning as far as the Biden administration's position and new revelations of what's going over in Ukraine, that's the real issue. The real issue is basically posturing. Is more posturing. And it's basically Russia saying, "Arr!" And the U.S. sent warships over there in order to monitor the situation and say, oh, okay, we paying attention. But they still haven't moved off of their position to continue to supply Ukraine and also agree with the idea that, you know, retaliating on Russian targets within Russia. I'm just amazed. Well, no, I'm not. I'm not amazed at how long this war is going on. All wars last for a long time. No war is quick. So whenever they said that it was going to be a quick coup, I never believed that in the first place.
To Cuba in terms of their own naval units. And as you pointed out, Cuba also saying that, look, there are no nuclear weapons on board the ship. There's absolutely no threat whatsoever. But still, talk us through how closely the U.S. Navy is watching this.
Well, the U.S. Navy essentially escorted them into Cuban waters as the ships, while they were in international waters, were essentially skirting the coast of Florida. So certainly they're watching them now. They will be keeping an eye on them if they depart from here and go to another U.S. adversary, the country of Venezuela. You know, the U.S. has naval maneuvers around the globe as well. They certainly have a much more active Navy right now than Russia's. So this is something these countries...
Somebody said, Putin said using nukes is on the table. This is more serious than y'all think. Listen, if somebody is actually wanting to do something, they're not going to announce it before they do it. I mean, that's a basic human characteristic. It's like somebody coming up to me and saying, man, you know I'm a killer. I'll be like, yeah. Or them being online and saying, man, you know what, I'm a killer, bro. I'm more worried about the guy that go to work every day that's frustrated with his boss than the dude that come up to me and tell me how much he a killer. Honestly. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't take it serious. Obviously, the United States of America is deploying, warships and they monitor in the situation because everybody monitors everybody anyway. But all I'm saying is, man, hey, listen, nukes are on the table. Like, stop it, buddy. Stop it. Because if that's what you was looking to do, if you was looking to surprise attack, I'm sure you wouldn't announce it.
They keep a distance from one another as they shadow one another's ships, and there's a certain amount of professionalism there. And yes, it's true that many other countries send their Navy ships here on friendly visits, such as this one. They allow the Cuban public sometimes to board their ships, as we expect to take place later on in the week here with the ships behind me. But of course, the relationship that Cuba had with Russia for so many years during the Cold War is very, very different from those relationships. No other nation in the world has based nuclear warheads here. No other nation in the world was so supportive of Cuba. Cuba was essentially a client state of the USSR for many, many years. And you hear Russian officials saying that they want to invest more in Cuba, that they want to help the Cuban economy grow. But they also sometimes lament that Cuba remains a communist-run state and Russia is not anymore. So even the Russians, despite the years of that close relationship, have trouble.
Tia Marie says, watch Trump's interview with Dr. Phil. He literally said this is one of his biggest fears, this, nukes, and the border. Okay, cool. Well, listen, Tia Marie, I also want you to consider the source. As much as I think that Trump should be president of the United States of America, I do not take everything that he says at face value, considering that he's trying to win an election. Well, what else was he supposed to say? You know what? Not that big of a deal. Of course, he's using marketing and other platforms in order to spread a message so that he can try to win the election. Objectively speaking, I mean, listen, just because I actually think that he would be the better pick and a better candidate as far as being the president of the United States of America, don't mean that I can't see through the BS when somebody is trying to instill something in you in order to get you to swing your election or your vote one particular way or another. He understands marketing and he understands how to communicate in order to get people to make an emotional decision, just like everybody else. I do not take everything that everybody says at face value, even if I think that they will be the better candidate for president of the United States of America. Of course, he's going to say, oh, this is my biggest fear. Well, he's basically trying to say that Biden is incompetent in his ability to be able to run the United States of America, especially with regard to war. So is he the better candidate? I believe so. But I also believe that he's making sure that he's saying something a certain way on certain platforms in order to tap into your emotional state so you can possibly make an emotional decision. So, you got to consider the source, you got to consider the circumstances, and you also got to make an informed decision.
Making anything happen in Cuba these days, which really says a lot about Cuba's economy and the entrenched bureaucracy here. But Cuban officials saying that simply U.S. sanctions have pushed them back into the arms of their old ally. But of course, the economy in Russia certainly is very different these days. Russia no longer able to finance Cuba as it once did.
So, yes, the United States of America, and I like to keep you guys informed on what's going on internationally and nationally here on American soil of what's going on, just so you guys can be informed, so you can have conversations outside of here, and then you can make your own decision as to what you think. I'm going to give my opinion. I'm going to break down what it is that I think, as I just did, and then you guys can make your own informed decision as a result of it also, all right? So just be mindful of it. I'm not saying that it's not something that you shouldn't take serious. Absolutely. But then at the same time, this is not something that's uncommon, and it happens all the time on a regular basis, all right?